So, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is the seventh Mission Impossible film, and after Mission Impossible Fallout, I feel like that's a really tough act to follow, just because Fallout has been, like, my favorite Mission Impossible film by far. Like, the stunts, what it sets up, the way that it's shot, it's just immaculate. And to follow that up, I feel like is really tough, especially for, having, like, a two-parter here. So it feels like Mission Impossible really has to up the ante here. And in terms of, following up from that film, I feel like this first part of Dead Reckoning actually does a pretty good job. Like, I don't feel like it's as, like, great as, like, Fallout, which was, like, Fallout was just, like, a perfect blend of the spy thriller aspects, and the action and the stunts were just so perfect. And Dead Reckoning, honestly, is it's very close, if not in the same ballpark as Fallout. Just because, like, it has the same amount of stakes, it has the great over the top stunts that you've come to expect from Tom Cruise. And it's so fast paced. Like, that's one thing I was worried about. This film runs over 2.5 hours long, and it keeps up the pace that you expect with the Mission Impossible film, where you're always guessing, always looking forward to the next scene, always curious to see what's around the next corner, who's going to pull off the mask, who's going to infiltrate, and what's going to go on in the next mission, and what could go awry, which it usually does. Because the thing is, like, the Mission Impossible films, they're all pretty much like the same type of story. The world is under a new threat by a terrorist organization, and Ethan Hunt, played by Tom Cruise, has to once again infiltrate with his team to track down a bunch of people across the world and steal back a MacGuffin to prevent the world from blowing up, much like in Fallout. Although I will say, Dead Reckoning is a little bit more interesting for the fact that in this entry, they're trying to stop a weapon that has become sentient. It's not like a sentient gun or anything. It's basically just an AI that might be able to infiltrate every network in the world, could destroy intelligence, and threaten to wipe out humanity. Much in the same way that the other terrorist organizations and other Mission Impossible entries have tried to do. So, standard type stuff here, feels like stuff that Ethan should be used to, and of course he's given another villain who has ties to him. In this case, he's facing off against a villain called Gabriel, played by Esai Morales. And of course, he has history with Ethan. He's more or less responsible for leading Ethan into this life of secrecy and working within intelligence. And Gabriel is also big on kind of having these kind of like, like the jigsaw killer type of traps, or just like, decide who are you going to save in this scenario. And, like, you can't save everyone, and is so highly calculative about that. I love the fact that that Gabriel is more or less acting as like this disciple for like this artificial intelligence, and is kind of basically kind of thinks of himself as kind of like almost kind of like as a clairvoyant, is just like, I have seen what's going to happen in the future just by the fact that I've used like math and all these calculations have come to be. And it's like, thank goodness the film doesn't lean too hard into that, mostly because, like, it does do a good job setting up the thematic elements of Ethan wanting to push people away to save them, but also realizing that, he can't quite do that. There's so many points where you're just like, guys, you got to get away from me. I'm bad news. If you're in my line of work, the bad guys are going to come after you. And of course, Ethan's cohorts and, love interests and, people he's worked for in the past and those who've stuck up for him are just gonna be like, no, we're along for the adventure, even though we're probably gonna get killed. But hey, we're saving the world. So you have like the familiar characters come back here. Ving Rhames, of course, is Luther, the computer technician, and Simon Pegg went back as Benji, the technical technician. So they do their standard stuff, Ving Rhames will hack into security cameras, and Simon Pegg will, try to like disarm bombs and like get like, the right coordinates for where to go. Rebecca Ferguson comes back as Ilsa Faust, in which, like, Ethan Hunt is very much concerned, like, I gotta shove Ilsa far away from this as possible. And of course, he can't do that because Elsa can't stay away. Even there's even one point in this film where kind of like Ethan Hunt realizes how deep he is in this, where like he doesn't have control of the situation, that he shoves everyone away, and of course they all come back immediately. It's like boomerangs. You know, he throws them, tries to get him out, tries to take on this mission by himself, and they just keep coming back. It's just like, you guys are like pennies, bad pennies. You just keep coming back to me, you know. So there's also a lot of parties involved here in terms of the big MacGuffin here, which is that the artificial intelligence is controlled by two keys that are being sought. They were thought to have been lost, but they're somewhere else in the world, and dangerous people want them. So this leads to Cruz gaining another ally, in which he runs into a thief called Grace, played by Haley Atwell. And they hit it up pretty well. I like the way that they're kind of like, you know, they run across each other, they cross paths, and they're very like quick on the dialogue, like they're snappy, they're in the moment, they realize they're in a public place and that they're being tracked and bad people are after them, and the IMF is keeping tabs on Ethan Hunt, and that he's got to basically escape from everyone. So the fact that they are able to team up amid, you know, the fact that Grace is still a thief and she's trying to get away from Ethan, they make a good pair. I liked watching them kind of like team up, especially since, you know, Ethan wants to push Ilsa as far back into the background as possible here, despite the fact that she keeps coming back. I also like the fact that they bring back Ilana, or the White Widow from the previous film, played by Vanessa Kirby, who also plays another key player who wants that key. So there's multiple bad guys that play here. Of course, there's people working within Central Intelligence who are also bad news. So I doubt this is like even like big spoilers at this point, because this is pretty much the standard formula for a Mission Impossible film. And on that level, in terms of the way that the film is directed, I love the way that it proceeds. Like, it's very quick. The dialogue is snappy. Even though, like, there are so many areas where I feel like the dialogue, especially for dealing with a rogue artificial intelligence, could just go off on like the simple platitudes for this type of thriller. And it comes close to like making the dialogue a little too simple. But before it could go off on like a platitude, it would quickly jump into like the next interesting twist that's coming from this, that's coming from this material. So there's always something happening, and I love how even when like there's scenes where we're not getting the cool stunts and action scenes, you're always guessing about, you know, who's gonna fight first, who's gonna get shot, who's gonna get killed, who's in disguise. What's going on here? That brilliant formula that makes Mission Impossible work so well, and it's still kicking here. It still works. I will say this though, like the one thing that kind of threw me off with this film is how silly it gets at times. And I don't mean like silly and like the characters like constantly trying to crack jokes. I'm referring more to the stunts themselves, which are kind of framed as almost too slapsticky. Like at one point, Ethan has to make this like daring entrance as quick as possible in order to save someone, and he takes out two bad guys with just dumb luck. Like, it's like the way that he takes them out is purely by accident of like the gravity and the shifting forces of the area that he's entering. Where it's like it's almost kind of like Pink Panthers, just kind of like wow, I didn't even mean to do that. I just accidentally knocked these guys out. And there's another scene in particular where there's a car chase, and it's a car chase with Ethan and Grace. And the way that it proceeds, like, there's some ridiculous moments where it feels like, in order to kind of like stall a bit or give like the bad guys a chance to catch up, some ridiculous things will go wrong. And I mean, that's kind of been like the Mission Impossible, you know, set up for a lot of these scenes. It's like they have a mission set up and they have like a plan, but then the plan goes awry, so then they have to improvise. Here, so much goes wrong within the car chase that it's honestly just, it's ridiculous at certain points. Like, you just can't help but laugh at it, especially for the fact that like the big car chase sequences here, it involves a yellow Fiat, and it involves Ethan and Grace in handcuffs, and it's just the way that it's played up as for like the silliness. It just made me think of Lupin the Third. I know this probably wasn't intentional and was probably mistaken, but when you have characters fiddling with handcuffs and like they're making ridiculous moves in a Fiat and just driving ridiculously all around the city, it just makes you think of Lupin. It's, I mean, like I'm not saying that like every film that has a Fiat in it is a Lupin the Third reference. It's just it has that silly tone where you kind of get that. Outside of that, though, like aside from just like the daring entrance and the car chase, this film actually gets pretty stern with trying to stress the seriousness of the situation here, which you want. I mean, for being a two-parter, that feels like it's more or less going to be like the franchise finale here, considering how old Tom Cruise is getting. You want to feel like there's weight here, and I love the fact that part one, even though it's very fast paced and it's trying to be quick and have as many twists and excitement as possible, it does feel like it's taking its time to set up the danger here, to make you care about Ethan's plight, to understand the situation, and to make you invested in the MacGuffin. Like, even though it's fairly simple here, like this entry is mostly just about getting the keys to like the big doomsday device, and then like the next entry is gonna focus more on like another MacGuffin. It makes you care about it because like the MacGuffin is unique. It's constantly changing. Characters are second guessing what it will do throughout this. Like, because in the other films, it's just like the characters are gonna get nukes and they're gonna blow stuff up. Like, what they're gonna do with it. Here, it's kind of interesting because like you don't know what's gonna happen, and that's the intriguing thing, is that when Central Intelligence actually does look at what this entity is doing and how it's just kind of like showing off that it could do whatever it wants, like that's very fascinating and very, very frightening as well, because like, here's Central Intelligence basically being like, God, if this thing can get into anything, what are we gonna do? So it's like, yeah, like there is like some weight to it where you're concerned about where all this is going. But of course, I know that for a lot of people, like, okay, this is mostly just gonna sound like fluff with everything I've talked about. What about the stunts and the action sequences? And yes, they are still cool. That big scene that Tom Cruise has been promoting, where he jumps off a cliff on a motorcycle and unleashes a parachute while trying to catch a train. Yes, that scene looks amazing. It's beautifully shot. The camera holds. You get to see all the great stuff there. It's still a lot of fun. It's exciting, especially when you watch in like the big Dolby or IMAX cinema, and just watching that big expansive area that Tom Cruise just descends into. That's just good filmmaking. It's exciting, it's great to look at, and there's tension with it. You care about where the scene is going, and it doesn't just feel like, oh, here's the set piece. Like, there is a reason that Tom Cruise needs to jump off at this specific point to get to this specific location. So it's a story that's like constantly moving and still has great stunts like that, especially the car chases, the fight scenes. There's a great opening shootout in this film that just like it hits you hard, mostly just because like the sound editing in that scene is just immaculate for utilizing it utilizes like environmental elements and tries to make the gun sound big and terrifying, and it works so well. That's basically the way that I guess I'd describe most of them. It's just that so many scenes punch so hard, but if you've watched the other Mission Impossible films, you know what to expect. You know that it's coming. You know what's happening here. I will say this though, I really did like the addition of I'm gonna mispronounce her name here, so sorry, but her name is the actress name is Pom Klementieff. Klementieff, I believe I'm pronouncing it. She plays a French assassin called Paris, who's mostly mute. She dresses in white, and she's a great addition. She has that kind of like quiet, terrifying presence to her that you just know she's gonna get into a knockdown, drag out fight with Ethan. And there's a great scene where she corners him in an alley, and they just have at it. And I gotta admit, like, for as much as like the cam work is pretty smooth in a lot of the action scenes, I did like the fact that the camera was getting in pretty close within like this alley setting, and how it was a little bit rickety because it feels like it's almost impossible to shoot in such a tight location without getting a little bit clever with like the camera tricks there. But yeah, that scene just works. In addition to all the stunts and the surprises, it keeps you guessing throughout, and it's genuinely exciting. So I doubt this is news for anyone who has seen the other Mission Impossible films, but this is definitely a must see. It's definitely high up there. Like and this is coming from someone who was very underwhelmed by Mission Impossible 3. And Mission Impossible 5, Rogue Nation, those films kind of felt just like they weren't as bad as like Mission Impossible 2, which was kind of all over the place. They just felt par for the course, and this is definitely high up there. It's very close to reaching the levels of Mission Impossible Fallout, in terms of like the story that it sets up and the stunts and the action scenes that it has. I don't even want to like I want to talk a whole bunch about like the big climax on the train, but it would spoil too much here, and I feel like there's words can't quite do justice describing just how intense and exciting it is for like the final few minutes of this film, and the fact that it ends as a part 1 and you're excited to see what happens in part 2. So much like Across the Spider-Verse later this year when it ended on a part 1 and you're just like, oh man, there's more of that coming. Man, I'm excited. So yeah, Dead Reckoning is another fantastic Mission Impossible film, and I absolutely cannot wait for part 2.